My name is Detective Michael Raines, and the night I walked back into an emergency room with a cold case trailing behind me was the night I stopped believing every mystery could be solved with evidence and logic. The call came just after midnight. Jane Doe, female, late 30s, found unresponsive in a car parked on the edge of town. No ID, no obvious trauma. The paramedics had dumped her into the ER with vitals that looked decent enough to buy her time, but not enough to answer questions. Normally, that wouldn't involve me. ERs are full of overdoses, unknowns, unclaimed bodies. But when the desk sergeant read me the preliminary report, a detail stopped me cold. The description matched a girl from one of my old cases. A case that had sat in the cold files for 20 years, gathering dust and whispering failure in the back of my mind. Rachel Klein, 17 when she disappeared. Last seen leaving her part-time job at a diner off Route 9. Scar across her collarbone from a childhood bike crash. Brown hair, thin build, 5'4". No leads, no witnesses worth trusting. The kind of case that makes you hate the sound of your own pen scratching unsolved at the bottom of the page. Now, 2 decades later, a Jane Doe rolls into the ER with that same scar. I drove through the night streets, half believing it was just coincidence, half feeling like the dead were rearranging themselves to mock me. The city was asleep except for the hospitals, where the lights never go out. I pulled into the lot of St. Bridget's Medical Center, the kind of place where the ER doors hiss open and shut all night, spilling shadows onto the pavement. The smell of disinfectant hit before the automatic doors even closed behind me, and I flashed my badge at the triage desk. The nurse there barely looked up, eyes buried in her screen, fingers hammering at the keyboard. She just waved me through toward Trauma 2. I walked down the corridor, the walls glowing pale under buzzing lights, and I thought about how many times I'd been in ERs before, usually for suspects, victims, or my own colleagues, but never for a case that should have been long dead. Through the glass, I saw her, pale, still, eyes half open, not tracking, a body that looked emptied out, like she'd poured herself into the bed and left only the outline behind. The monitor beeped steady, too steady, numbers glowing calm in the dim light. Her lips didn't move, but I swear the air near her bed felt heavier, as if it carried words no one wanted to say. I stepped closer. The scar was there, right where I remembered. A line of pale skin across the collarbone, healed long before tonight. For the first time in years, the case folder in my mind cracked open, pages fluttering in the dark. Rachel Klein, missing at 17. Mother died waiting. Father drank himself into silence. All that was left was the file in the cabinet. And now this woman on the bed who looked like time had both passed and not passed at all. The ER staff moved around her with mechanical precision, checking vitals, ordering labs, sliding blankets from the warmer across her frame. But none of them knew the weight she carried for me. None of them knew I had once promised her family I'd bring her home. I stayed by the glass, just out of the way, watching her chest rise and fall like it belonged to someone else. And I thought, sometimes cases don't close. Sometimes they wait for you in places you should never expect, like an ER hallway at midnight. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just another Jane Doe. This was a door reopening. A door I was never meant to walk back through. The curtain shifted, and that's when she entered. Nurse Elena Marquez. I'd seen her type before in ERs across the city. Steady hands, quick eyes. Someone who could bark orders at a resident 1 second and talk a grieving mother down from hysteria the next. But there was something different in the way she looked at me as I lingered by the glass panel of Trauma 2. Not suspicion, not annoyance, but recognition. Like she already understood this case wasn't just medicine, it was something heavier. You with her? She asked, glancing from me to the Jane Doe. Her voice carried that clipped calm that nurses cultivate when the room is a storm and they're the only anchor. Not exactly, I said, holding up my badge. Detective Michael Raines. I caught a detail in her description. Thought I should take a look. Elena gave me the kind of nod people give when they're not sure if they want your help, but also know they don't want to face what's in front of them alone. She pulled the curtain wider, motioned for me to step closer. Vitals are stable. Glucose normal. No signs of trauma. CT was clean. She's alive. On paper. But if you ask me... She stopped, eyes flicking back to the woman. There's something not right here. The woman's chest rose and fell in that machine-perfect rhythm, steady as a metronome, but her eyes, half open, unblinking, staring at something past the ceiling. It was the same look I'd seen on crime scene photos, the vacant gaze of people whose stories had been cut mid-sentence. I told Elena about the scar. She frowned, leaned over, brushed her fingers across the collarbone just above the blanket line. You're right. It's old. Not from tonight. Not from anything recent. Her voice dropped lower, more to herself than to me. People don't just walk in here with scars that match missing person files. She called over a younger resident, a red-haired woman gnawing at the inside of her cheek. They traded a flurry of clinical language. Labs pending. Toxicology negative. EEG requested. But beneath the jargon, I heard the unease. Medicine loves certainty. This room had none. When the resident left, Elena pulled me aside. What aren't you telling me? I hesitated. There are rules about involving outsiders in active investigations, even old ones. But there are also rules about what happens when a case stares you in the face 20 years later and dares you to look away. Her name might be Rachel Klein, I said finally. 17 when she disappeared. That was 2 decades ago. The scar matches. The build. The hair. I worked the case until it went cold. We never found a body. Never found her. Until tonight, maybe. Elena's eyes darkened, not with disbelief, but with something closer to dread. You're saying she's been gone 20 years and just shows up here, alive but not alive? That's what I'm saying. We stood there in silence, the hum of the monitors filling the space like static. Outside the curtain, the ER rolled on, stretchers rattling, a toddler crying in the waiting room, a crash cart being pulled somewhere down the hall, life as usual. But in this corner, time felt suspended. A commotion at the front desk broke the spell, raised voices, a man demanding answers. Elena glanced at me, then back at the Jane Doe. I'll cover here. You should see who that is. I walked down the hall, the tiles slick with that hospital shine that never feels clean no matter how much bleach they pump through the air. At the desk stood a man in his 50s, work jacket frayed at the cuffs, eyes wild with the kind of fear only family carries. They found her car, he was saying. Route 9, Walmart side. She didn't come home last night. Someone tell me what's going on. My gut tightened. Route 9. Same as Rachel Klein's last known location all those years ago. I pulled him into a consult room, closed the door most of the way. Start from the beginning, I said. He introduced himself as Daniel Klein, husband. He described his wife. Dark hair, 5'4", scar on the collarbone. My blood ran cold. The timeline didn't fit. Rachel had vanished at 17. This woman looked late 30s, early 40s, but his description fit like a glove. She called me, he whispered, tonight, after midnight. Just before they told me she was here. I picked up, but there was nothing, just a sound, like someone trying to speak with their mouth full of water. Then, the line went dead. The hairs on my arms rose. Elena's words echoed in my head. Alive, but not alive. I escorted Daniel toward Trauma 2, his steps heavy, body trembling like a man bracing for a punch he couldn't block. Elena met us at the curtain, her eyes scanning me for a silent answer I didn't have. When Daniel saw the woman on the bed, his face collapsed. "Rachel," he said. His voice cracked like dry wood splitting. He rushed forward, stopped short of her wrist, hovered there like touching her might undo whatever fragile thread still held her here. Elena looked at me, then back at him. "You know her?" "She's my wife," he said. "She's been gone for years, but that's her. That's Rachel." And in that moment, with the monitor beeping steady and the air thick with silence, the past and present tangled together into something neither of us could untangle. Because if this was Rachel, then the cold case wasn't cold at all. It was alive, breathing under hospital lights, and dragging us both into a story that had no business being told again. The thing about cold cases is that you expect them to stay where you left them, in a drawer, in your head, in the silence of the families who stopped answering your calls. They're supposed to be still, but nothing about that night was still. Not the monitors that lied, not the lips that moved without sound, and not the way Daniel Klein whispered his wife's name like it was both a prayer and a curse. Elena pulled me aside after Daniel's first outburst. Her hands were steady, but her voice wasn't. "You said she disappeared at 17. He's saying she's been his wife for years. That doesn't line up." "I know," I said, "and yet here we are." We dug in the only way we knew how. Elena combed through the intake chart while I made calls to the precinct, asking for the old file to be pulled from archives. I heard the hesitation in the records clerk's voice when I gave the name. "Detective, that file hasn't been touched in 20 years. You sure you want it tonight?" "Send it," I said, "now." Meanwhile, Daniel sat by the bed, fingers wrapped around Rachel's wrist, whispering fragments of their life together. The lake house, the autumn leaves, the way she laughed at old black and white movies. His voice shook, the way people's voices do when they're trying to anchor themselves to the past so the present doesn't swallow them. The monitor beeped on, steady as a lie. Oxygen sat 99%, heart rate 70, blood pressure normal. Elena muttered under her breath. A body that looks like it's gone, and a monitor that swears it's fine. Something isn't right. Then it happened. Her lips moved. Not random, not reflex. 3 syllables, faint as smoke but undeniable. Elena froze, leaning close. Daniel's grip tightened, knuckles white. "What did she say?" I asked. Daniel's eyes were wet, unblinking. "She said, 'Don't follow me.'" The words settled over us like dust in an abandoned house, the kind that never goes away no matter how often you sweep. Elena pulled back, shaken. She can't just speak like that, not with her EEG flat, not with everything reading normal but silent at the same time. I thought about the call Daniel swore he'd received, just after midnight, when Rachel was already here, unresponsive. I thought about the scar across her collarbone, a scar from a childhood accident I'd seen in the original case photos. And I thought about how the world didn't line up the way it was supposed to. We formed an uneasy team that night, me chasing the ghosts of evidence, Elena chasing the truth medicine wouldn't give her, and Daniel chasing a wife who might already be gone. The file arrived by courier just before 3 a.m., a battered folder with edges curled from 2 decades of being shoved aside. I spread it open on the console table. Photos of a 17-year-old girl stared back at us. Dark hair, slim build, eyes that carried more hope than the night had left. The scar was there. Same place, same shape. Elena shook her head. "That's her. I mean, it can't be, but it is." Daniel leaned over the photos, face twisting. "No, my wife was older when I met her. This girl's a child." His voice faltered, "but it's her face." The contradiction tore through the room. If this woman was Rachel, how had she lived 20 years unseen, only to reappear married under another name? If she wasn't Rachel, then why did every detail line up? Elena broke the silence first. What if the case was never cold? What if it was hidden, covered up? I wanted to believe it. Wanted to dig up corruption, some buried secret, something I could put into a report and hand upstairs. Murder, kidnapping, identity theft, anything human. But then the monitor let out another sharp flatline tone, long enough this time for every nurse in the bay to freeze. Elena pressed the leads down again, her voice trembling as she said, "Loose connection." The line came back. The numbers were unchanged. Rachel's lips moved once more, slower this time. Elena leaned in, close enough to feel the cold air of her breath. Daniel mouthed the words as they formed, "Not yours to find." Elena stumbled back, eyes wide. Daniel broke down, his voice rising in panic. "She's talking to us. She knows we're here. What does it mean?" I had no answer. I'd walked into the ER thinking this was a case I could finally close, but by the middle of the night, with a nurse who didn't trust the monitors, a husband who claimed a life no file could confirm, and a woman who whispered warnings from somewhere between life and death, I realized this wasn't about solving anything. This was about surviving the truth that wouldn't fit into any box we had. By 3:30 a.m., the ER had settled into that strange rhythm between chaos and exhaustion. The waiting room buzz had dulled, stretchers wheeled past in quieter bursts, and even the overhead pages seemed softer, like the hospital itself was catching its breath. But inside Trauma 2, there was no breath to catch. The air was heavy, tense, as if the room itself had taken sides in a fight none of us understood. The old file lay open on the consult table, its photographs staring back at us in the dim light. Rachel Klein at 17, scar clear across her collarbone. Elena kept pacing, her sneakers squeaking against the tile, muttering clinical observations under her breath like mantras. Vitals normal, labs clean, CT head unremarkable, toxicology negative. Over and over, the language of reason, trying to push back against what we were all seeing with our own eyes. Daniel sat by the bed, gripping Rachel's wrist as though he could anchor her to the present by sheer will. His face was pale, hollow, as if each monitor beep was draining him further. "She's been with me for years," he whispered, not looking at us. "She's my wife. She's not some cold case." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe in anything that gave this night a shape I could recognize. But when I looked at the photo in the file, then back at the woman in the bed, I couldn't shake the sense that I was staring at the same person, preserved by something time shouldn't allow. "Detective," Elena said sharply, breaking my thoughts. She had stopped pacing, her eyes fixed on the intake notes scrawled by the admitting paramedics. "Look at this. Found in her car. Engine off, doors unlocked, no ID, no phone, just sitting there." I scanned the lines. It was almost identical to the last report filed on Rachel 20 years ago. Found alone, last seen in her car, Route 9, no personal belongings. The words mirrored each other so perfectly it was like someone had copied and pasted history. "Could be a cover-up," I said quietly, almost to myself. "Someone staged it again. Same setup. Maybe she was taken, reinserted, kept alive somehow." Elena frowned. "That's not a medical explanation. That's a horror story." Before I could answer, the monitor let out another piercing flatline tone. This time it held for 3 full seconds before the waveform snapped back. All of us froze. Elena leaned over the leads, hands steady but eyes wide. "Connections are clean. No reason for that." Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the tile. "She's telling us something. She doesn't want to be here. She said not to follow her." His voice cracked. "And you keep pulling her back." "Mr. Klein," I said firmly, the cop voice sliding back into place. "Sit down. We need to keep control of the situation." He didn't. He leaned over the bed, pressing his forehead to Rachel's hand. "Tell me what to do," he whispered. And then, impossibly, her lips moved again. Elena leaned in, face pale. I stepped closer. We both heard it this time, faint but clear. 3 syllables, "Let me go." Elena staggered back. "That's not possible. Neurology's flat. EEG's showing nothing. She shouldn't be capable of speech." Daniel broke into sobs, clutching her hand tighter. "She wants me to let her go." "She's asking me." I looked at the file again. The original detective notes, the ones I'd written, were there. Descriptions of leads that went nowhere, interviews that contradicted each other, rumors of someone powerful, with reason to bury the case. Back then, I'd suspected obstruction. Pressure from above. Evidence disappearing before I could tag it. It had the stench of a cover-up, but tonight, looking at the woman on the bed, the steady monitor, the lips whispering things that couldn't be real, I felt a deeper chill. What if it wasn't a man-made cover-up? What if the case had never been solvable because it had never been just human? Elena's voice cut through my thoughts. "Detective, If this is Rachel, then something happened to her that science can't explain. If it isn't Rachel, then someone spent 20 years creating a copy of her. Neither answer felt safer than the other. Daniel suddenly stood, eyes wild. She called me. Tonight, after midnight. How could she do that if she's been here this whole time? The question hung in the air like smoke. Elena looked at me for answers I didn't have. I stared at the file, the scar, the monitor, and the woman who was both alive and not. The fluorescent light above flickered once, briefly plunging the bay into shadow before buzzing back to life. And for that second, I could have sworn Rachel's eyes shifted, just slightly, toward me, a look that said you're too close to something you'll never understand. I turned away, my throat tight, because whether it was a murder buried by powerful hands or a truth that belonged to something beyond us, I realized the same thing. We were never going to leave this night with answers, only with the kind of questions that follow you long after you've gone. By dawn, the ER had thinned. The waiting room chairs were emptying. The air smelled less of bleach and more of stale coffee, and the clatter of carts gave way to tired voices handing over reports to the day shift. On paper, the night was winding down, but inside Trauma 2, nothing had eased. Elena had ordered the transfer to ICU. Protocol, she said, though her voice trembled around the edges. Continuous monitoring, neurology consult, intubate if necessary. The language of order, of control. But her eyes gave her away. She didn't believe control was possible anymore. Daniel refused to leave her side. As the gurney was prepared, he clung to Rachel's wrist, whispering, "I won't let go, I won't let go." Every time the blanket shifted, he smoothed it down like a ritual. Every time the monitor beeped, he flinched, waiting for the tone that would mean something final. When the team wheeled her down the corridor, I walked behind them. The fluorescent lights flickered in sequence as we passed, and the sound of the gurney wheels echoed too loudly, like a cart being pushed down a tunnel instead of a hallway. The ICU door swallowed her in, and for a moment I thought that would be the end of it. Another handoff, another unsolved story. But Daniel stopped short before the doors closed. He turned to me, eyes hollow. "You heard her," he said. "Not a question, a fact. I didn't answer. Couldn't." He leaned closer, voice breaking. "If she asks me to follow, I will." The doors shut between us, sealing him on one side, me on the other. I stood there, my hands still at my side where my badge hung heavy, and I realized it meant nothing here. Authority, training, evidence, all of it felt useless against what I had just witnessed. Elena came up beside me. Her hair was pulled loose from its tie, her face drawn pale. She didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she said, "We'll write this up as unexplained altered mental status. That's all the chart will ever show." I nodded, though my chest felt like it was caving, a neat phrase for something that had ripped holes in the night. When I left the hospital, the first light of morning stretched across the parking lot. The glass doors closed behind me, sealing the fluorescent hum inside. I lit a cigarette I didn't really want, just to feel the smoke burn my lungs and remind me I was alive. The case file weighed under my arm, its edges soft with age, and now stained with a night I couldn't explain. I told myself it could have been a cover-up, that someone with power had hidden the truth, manipulated the evidence, and that Rachel's reappearance was just the surface of something rotten. That was the explanation that let me breathe. But another part of me, the part that still felt her eyes shift toward me, the part that had heard lips whisper things no EEG could record, knew it might have been something else. Something we weren't built to understand. That's why I left the force not long after. Not because I was tired of the grind, or because the hours wore me down, but because I couldn't walk into another ER, see another gurney, and wonder whether the body on it belonged to the living or the dead, or to something in between. And I've carried the question ever since. Was Rachel Klein the victim of a buried crime, hidden away by hands that wanted her story erased? Or did we step too close to something that doesn't care about our reports, our rules, or our need for answers? That's the truth of that night. I'll never know which it was. But maybe you will. So I'll ask you, what do you think really happened?